Hi, hello, what's up, man? Welcome to Tax Ladder. Today we're going to discuss three chapters: accounts and records, refunds, and e-way bill. What we'll be left with is customs foreign trade policy along with appeals revision. We're going to finish those off in the upcoming lessons. But today we're going to discuss these three. My name is Shivakant and I'm a chartered accountant. Let us move forward quickly. We're going to look at what are the type of refunds, what is the due date for making an application for refund in each type of refund, and what is the documentary evidence to be attached for the refund application in case of each of the type of refund. So this is the columns I've divided it into. First one, zero rated supplies. What are zero rated supplies? Export of goods or services with or without payment of tax is zero rated supplies, including supply to a SEZ unit or developer with or without payment of tax is a zero rated supply. So for making a refund application, the time limit is 2 years in any case of refund application, 2 years from the relevant date. The relevant date in case of export of goods on payment of tax or without tax is what is the date on which the ship carrying the goods leaves India, or what is the date on which the mode of conveyance which is carrying those goods is leaving India. So let us see the relevant date on which the vessel or aircraft on which goods are loaded leave India, date on which the goods leave the frontier of India if it is being transported by land. Let us say it is in such a way that goods can be transported by land. It is from India to Pakistan, or let us say Bangladesh, because there is a land in between us. We can easily transport goods by land. There is no need for a seaway, there is no need for an airway. So in that case, what is the date on which the goods leave the frontier of India? From that date, 2 years. What if the goods are delivered by post? The date on which the goods are dispatched by the postal authorities. From that date, let us count 2 years, and that is the due date for making an application for refund. 2 years from these dates. What are those? For a ship or aircraft, 2 years from the date on which the ship carrying goods leaves India. In case of goods being transported by land, what is the date on which the goods cross the customs frontiers of India? There's a frontier, there is an official check post which tells us when it crosses the customs frontier. So what is that date? From that, 2 years is the time limit for making a refund application. In case of by post, date on which goods are dispatched by the postal authorities. What is the evidence that need to be attached? Let us think logically. What is the proof of goods leaving India? The shipping bill or bill of export shall be treated as refund application. So in case of export of goods with payment of tax, the shipping bill filed itself is treated as the refund application. What happens is, I file the shipping bill through the IceGate portal. So once the shipping bill is filed, it is treated as an automatic refund application. So I would have quoted some invoice number in the GSTR1 that I filed. So the GSTR1 is matched with the information filed with the IceGate portal. So the GSTR portal asks the IceGate portal, have the goods been exported? Have the goods been exported? Asks the GST portal to the IceGate portal. The IceGate portal says yes, the goods have been exported because it has details of the shipping bill. It has details of the shipping bill. Once the shipping bill is there, the goods are said to have been accepted for export, and once the goods cross the customs frontier, the captain of the ship files another document which is confirmation that the goods have exported the country. So if that information is confirmed by the IceGate portal and both of them match, the invoice details in GSTR1 should match with the one filed within the IceGate portal. If those are not matching, the refund application is not processed. So one has to be very careful while filling up GSTR1 and GSTR3B. Even the port code and shipping bill number should match pi by pi. Otherwise, the refund application will not be processed. So that is why a professional generally files a refund application and even files a GSTR1 and 3B for the exporters. Now, in case of without payment of tax, I will take the refund of the input tax credit which has not been utilized. So for that, what is the documents that need to be attached? Statement showing the number and dates of shipping bills and relevant export invoices. So I have to give a statement which shows that this is the date of invoice which has been exported, this is the invoice number, and this is the shipping bill for that particular invoice. So these details have to be attached in RFD01 if in case I'm filing a refund application. So here these have to be specifically attached. In case of without payment of tax, with payment of tax there is no need to file a separate refund application. So in case of without payment of tax, these are the document statement showing number of invoices and date of shipping bills along with relevant export invoices. Alright, export of services. Now we've talked of goods. Now what about services? So there is no physical necessity or evidence which is possible to show that the services have physically been exported because it is intangible. So what is the relevant date for services? 2 years is calculated from which date? Service before receipt of payment. So is the service provided before the receipt of payment, or is the service provided after receipt of payment? Those are the two questions that one need to answer. So if the service is provided before receipt of payment, then what is the date of receipt of payment? From that date, 2 years you count. So that is the due date for filing refund application. Date of receipt of convertible foreign exchange where permitted. Now what if the payment is received before and the service is provided later? Then I take the due date of issue of invoice as the relevant date. So due date of issue of invoice or date of issue of invoice. So in this case, now think logically what needs to be attached. So he's saying the relevant date is date of receipt of payment in case service is provided before payment. So I have to give him proof that the money has actually been received. Even the definition of export says that the amount has to be received in convertible foreign exchange. So for that, I have to give him proof of that. What is the proof? FIRC, Foreign Inward Remittance Certificate, or BIRC as some people call it. Statement containing details of, this is common for everything, the details of invoices, date of invoice, number of invoice. So the statement has to be given. It could be an Excel sheet which is duly signed, or it could be in any format, but these details should be given. Copies of the FIRC or BIRC should also be given. Now let us look at the third point. Third point says zero rated supplies. Supply of goods or services to a SEZ unit or developer on payment of tax or without payment of tax. Now as we've already discussed, zero rated supply includes supply to a SEZ unit or developer with or without payment of tax. Now what is the relevant date in this case? He says date of payment of tax. When do you make payment of tax? That is the date of for which I calculate the due date for making a refund application. So let us say today I make an export. What date of payment of tax is he saying? He is saying that when will a person pay tax? Normally I make a payment of tax when I file my GSTR 3B. So for a SEZ unit, generally sometimes a shipping bill is not necessary, because only in case of physical exports a shipping bill is filed and that will be treated as an automatic refund application. But in case of a supply to a SEZ unit, because it is in India only, sometimes there is no real necessity of filing a shipping bill. So that is why the date of payment of tax when I file my 3B is the date for counting the 2 years. So 2 years from the date of payment of tax is the time limit for making refund application. So what is the documentary evidence that needs to be attached? So this is, as I told you, common for everything. Statement containing date of invoice, invoice number and value, name and date of invoice. So one more important condition is, so these SEZ units are set up for specified purpose. An IT SEZ is set up for carrying IT activities. A pharma SEZ is set up for carrying pharma activities. So the authorized operations for an IT SEZ are information technology activities. If it does something else, it is not authorized. So the benefit of export refund is given only for authorized operations if they are done. So if I make a supply of service to a SEZ unit or supply of goods to a SEZ unit and it uses for unauthorized operations, then I cannot claim a refund. Understand? So I need an endorsement from the specified officer of the special economic zone saying that the goods that are being purchased by the SEZ unit or services that are being availed by the SEZ unit have to be used for authorized operations. Otherwise, I cannot make a refund application. So this is one additional attachment. Endorsement from the specified officer that supplies have been used for authorized operations and declaration that tax has not been collected from the SEZ unit or developer. Now, what does this mean? Tax has not been collected from the SEZ unit or developer. So, if I collect tax, then I'm just paying what I collect, I'm paying to the government. I cannot say that it is going out of my pocket. Only if things are going out of my pocket which should not go, I will claim a refund. So, if I do claim a refund of what I collect from him, then I am getting double benefit, right? So, whatever I'm paying, or rather I should actually give it back to him if I get the refund. That I'm not doing, right? So I'm getting a double benefit. So if I collect the amount of tax from him, so that declaration should also be given. The amount has not been collected from the, so for a SEZ unit supply, what are the three evidences? Statement showing invoices and date of invoice, one. Second one, an endorsement from the specified officer that the goods or services are being used for authorized operations. Three, a declaration that the amount of tax has not been collected from the SEZ unit or developer. Three things need to be attached. Due date of payment of tax is the date that should be considered for calculating 2 years from the relevant date. All right. Now let us move forward. Deemed exports. What are deemed exports? Deemed exports, man. Supply to a special supply to an advance authorization holder or export promotion of capital goods license holder. So if I make a supply to these people, so I am making a deemed export. So what these people are supposed to do is they hold an advance authorization. So whatever they purchase locally or whatever they import can be done without payment of tax. That is one advantage there. So if they do it without payment of tax, with the condition that they will export the goods whatever they purchase or they use it for manufacture of something which they'll export. That is the condition based on which the license has been issued to them. So the pakka thing here is whatever I sell it to a person who is owing the advance authorization or EPCG, I am damn sure that he will export it. The next step is export. So I say that you are giving the benefit to him. I am also indirectly an exporter. So because I'm the next person to the exporter, you also have to give me the benefit of export. Because ultimately, if I am selling, he is again selling it again, which is an export to another country. So I also have to get the benefit. So the deemed export concept has been introduced. It was there earlier also. It's been continued now. So any supply to an EPCG holder or advance authorization holder, I will also get the benefit. So the benefit can be taken by either the supplier or the recipient. Either that guy, I charge tax on the invoice, he can either claim a refund of the input credit that he has, he pays the tax to me, I pay it to the government, or he says, I will not claim a refund, you claim a refund. If he gives the benefit to me, I will claim the refund. I charge the tax on the invoice, but he will not pay me the tax. I just pay it off to the government and I claim a refund of the entire amount. But I have to obtain a declaration from him saying that he is not claiming a refund or he is not even claiming the input credit. So if he claims the input credit, again double benefit is being given. So that let us say 100 rupees is the credit, 100 rupees is getting credit, tax is being lost. 100 rupees I am getting refund, tax is being lost. Nowhere the government is gaining. All right. So this double benefit should not be there. That is why I obtain a declaration from him saying that he will not claim a refund. One, he will not avail input credit. Based on these two conditions, I as a deemed exporter can claim a refund. So what is the relevant date? Date on which return relating to deemed exports is furnished. So return for us is 3B. GSTR 1 is not a return. Please remember. Documentary, an undertaking from the recipient that ITC has not been availed by that person. I have to get it. Refund is not being claimed by the recipient, as I told you. A statement containing number and date of, this is common for all, a statement containing number and date of relevant invoices. Evidence of supplies being received from the jurisdictional officer or the recipient of the said deemed exports. So I have to prove that, I have to also attach an evidence that physically the goods have actually been received by the person who is holding the advance authorization. So that evidence has to be given to me by the jurisdictional officer of the recipient. He should say that, okay, the goods have actually been received at the premises of the recipient. He should endorse that on the document or delivery challan and give it back to the supplier, that is me. Or I have to obtain a declaration from the recipient himself saying that goods have been actually received. Evidence that supply is received from the jurisdictional officer or recipient of the said deemed export. All right. So is this only for goods? Yes, it is only for goods. Now refund of unutilized ITC accumulated on account of inverted duty structure. So what is inverted duty structure? Let us say I am making a supply of goods. All right, I am making a supply of goods. The rate of tax on which is 18%. So I outwardly I charge 18%. I collect it and I pay to the government. But my input tax is 28%. So whatever inputs I use for making this product are at the rate of 18%, are at the rate 28%. So my output tax rate is much lower than my input tax rate. My ITC will remain as it is and I will be unable to utilize this. Or let us assume that my output tax rate is 2% or 1% and my input tax is 28%. So I will never be able to set off my entire input credit because I don't even have output tax at all. Almost 1% is very nominal. So for people like this, they have an option to claim a refund of the ITC that is in their balance. There is a specific mechanism prescribed. We'll look at it later. But for now, understand that the ITC that is left over, which remains unutilized, can be claimed as refund by this person. But that is called inverted duty structure. Due date, what is the due date? Due date for furnishing return for the relevant period for which refund is being claimed. Let us say February month. Due date for filing return is March 20. Generally, forget unfortunate circumstances, generally it is 20th of the next month. Here he says, remember, due date for furnishing. If the due date is extended, then the relevant date is extended. Here he says, in deemed exports, the date on which return is furnished. That means even if I file late, it is okay. Whatever date you file, that day I count. It is not the due date. Even if you file late, you can claim a refund within 2 years from the date you file, even if you file late. Here he says due date for furnishing. See, because so it is much more strict in case of inverted duty structure. All right, what is the documentary evidence? So basically he needs evidence that my input credit is suffering a much higher tax than the output tax. So what evidence can you attach? The details of inward invoices received. A statement containing name and date of invoices received and issued during the tax period. All right. Now, refund pursuant to an order, decree, judgment of any appellate authority, appellate tribunal or court. So, a tribunal orders that a refund has to be granted to me. So, date on which that order is communicated to me, within 2 years from that date of communication to me, I can claim a refund. The refund form, in all the cases, RFD 01, documentary evidence, order passed. Order, decree, judgment of an appellate authority, appellate tribunal. So for order of an appellate authority, appellate tribunal, or even a court for that matter, high or supreme, provisional assessment finalized and amount of tax paid in excess. Let us assume that because of some situation, I am unable to see my businesses in such a way that the price payable can be finalized only after certain calculations are done. If you look at internet service providers who provide service to big companies, there is a service agreement that is entered. You have to look at, calculate what is the downtime each month, and based on that the final bill happens. So for calculating the downtime of the internet, some calculations need to be made, and it takes a few weeks. So for me to finalize this, some time is there. So what I do is, I'm unable to calculate what my tax is. So what I do is, I do a provisional assessment. And based on the provisional assessment that I do, I file the return. I pay the amount of tax and I file it. So when I finally come to find out what the final tax payable is, let us say it is something more than what I provisionally assessed. So in this case, or let us say what I actually have to pay is lesser than the provisional assessment. So I want a refund now. So in this case, what is the due date? Provisional assessment finalized, and amount of tax paid is in excess. Date of adjustment of tax after final assessment. All right. So what is the date of final assessment? That date, say 2 years you count for the due date. What is the evidence? Reference number of final assessment order and copy of the said order. All right. Final assessment is actually done by the proper officer. When I make an application for provisional assessment and pay the tax, the final assessment is actually done by the proper officer, and he gives a final assessment order. Based on that, I get a refund or I need to pay more tax. So date of order and evidence obviously that should be attached is the final assessment order. Refund being claimed by the recipient. Date of receipt of goods or services. So in some cases the recipient claims the refund. What are those cases we just now discussed? Deemed exports. In the case of deemed exports, either I can claim it or he can claim it, the recipient of deemed exports. In case he is claiming it, what is the due date for filing a refund application for him? The date of receipt of goods or services. What is the date of receipt of goods by him? Maybe the delivery challan. When does he receive the goods in his godown? From that 2 years you count. That is the due date for filing refund application. Now what evidence does he need? Details of invoices. So along with issue of delivery challan and delivery of goods, I also send an invoice to him. That is what that guy needs to attach to the refund application. Excess payment of tax. By mistake, my accountant, this has happened a lot in the first year of GST. Excess payment of tax has been made. So can I claim a refund? Yes, of course. So evidence of excess payment, what is that excess payment? You have to attach it as evidence in the RFD 01 and file a refund application. Tax paid on supply which has not been provided. What is this? Let us look at the Corona era. Lots of singers have are supposed to hold conferences all over the country, and because of this COVID situation, it has been cancelled. So the singer raised an invoice, some advance has been received, and I paid the tax also on advance. But now the program is no longer happening. I have to get a refund of the tax that I have already paid. I give him the tax back and I claim a refund now. So can he claim a refund? Yes. So what is the relevant date payment of tax? So anything other than specific situations, blindly put the relevant date as payment of tax. What are specific situations? Deemed exports. The due date is date of showing the deemed exports in the relevant return, or in case of inverted duty structure, due date of filing the return for the relevant period, or for exports, date on which goods are leaving the country by ship. So except those specific cases, for everything else, put the relevant date as payment of tax. If you are unable to find out, payment of tax. Excess payment of tax, payment of tax. Okay. Tax paid on supply which has not been provided, relevant date is payment of tax. Documentary evidence, generally what documentary evidence will you put? Evidence that the program has been cancelled. So because there is no specific mention in the act or rules for what needs to be attached. Refund of tax wrongly created and paid to the government. Refund of tax wrongly created and paid to the government. What does this mean? So instead of IGST, I collect CGST and SGST. Instead of CGST and SGST, I collect IGST and pay it to the government. In this case also I can claim a refund, but I have to pay the correct tax. Let us say CGST, SGST has to be paid, but I paid IGST. So what I have to do now is I have to pay CGST, SGST in cash. I cannot adjust the amount already paid and say that you set off internally. That will not happen. You have to actually pay the tax in cash and claim a refund application separately. This will be a huge blow to the business's cash flow, but we cannot do anything. So the relevant date is payment of tax. Statement containing details of interstate supplies treated as intrastates. So all those need to be attached. Refund of IGST paid by tourists leaving India. So remember that, let us say a tourist comes from England, he comes to Kashmir, he buys a shawl, woolen shawl. Let us say he buys 50 woolen shawls. He buys 50 woolen shawls and he takes it back to UK. He can claim a refund of the tax he pays in the country. Alright. He has to file a refund application RFD01 within 2 years from the date of payment of tax. Alright, date refund of IGST paid by tourists leaving India on goods taken out of India. Alright, refund of taxes on purchases made by UN bodies on embassies can be claimed. So for UN bodies and embassies or consulates, they can claim a refund of the taxes. Why don't they just exempt the purchases made by the UN bodies or embassies? So what they have to do now is they have to purchase the goods, pay tax on those goods, whatever CGST, SGST or IGST, and they can claim a refund of the tax paid on the inputs purchased by them by filing a refund application, which gives details of what are all the purchases that I've made, what is the tax that I've paid, that he'll get a refund in his bank account. The reason they're doing this is they want a trail of who are making supplies to the UN bodies. Otherwise, if I completely exempt tax, so a lot of black money would happen, right? If I completely exempt tax, so these people who are supplying to the UN bodies might take advantage of it and might even not show this in their turnover, even though it is credited to their bank account. They maintain a separate bank account with only transactions with UN bodies and might get away with it. So that is something that the government does not want to happen. A non-resident taxable person shall claim a refund of excess tax paid by him in the last refund required, last return required to be furnished by them. So an NRTP or casual taxable person, as we already discussed, pays some initial deposit amount estimating the amount of tax that he needs to pay during the entire period of his business and pays it initially itself. So let us say after the entire business or transactions have taken place, he finds that he has actually deposited excess amount more over and above the amount of tax he needs to pay. Then in this case, he can claim a refund. So the last return, generally if GSTR 3 was there, so the return GSTR 3 filed would have been the refund application. The final 3 would have been the refund application, but now an NRTP or CTP needs to file a refund application separately, giving the details of the tax that he paid in excess in a statement. Yeah, a declaration from the applicant that the incidence of tax. So I have to file a declaration that I have not actually collected the tax from the other person. If I collect the tax, then there is no loss to me even if I don't get a refund. So I have to get a declaration that I was not unjustly enriched. So double benefit should not be received by anyone. See, if I collect it from him and I again claim a refund from the government, so that is not correct, right? So I have to give a declaration that the benefit has not been passed on, the burden has not been passed on to the other person. So that declaration is not required in cases where the claim of refund is less than or equal to 2 lakh rupees. So if it is more than 2 lakh rupees, I need to give a declaration. A claim exceeding 2 lakhs needs to be accompanied by a certificate from a chartered accountant or cost accountant. However, no declaration is required in the following cases. So in either cases, the declaration is not required in case of tax paid on export of goods or services or both. As per section 54 subsection 8, on exports, of goods or services, I don't need to give a declaration. Unutilized ITC on zero rated supplies and inverted duty structure. In those cases, I don't need to give a declaration saying that the burden has not been, because in case of exports, obviously, see, everything is recorded. There is no need to seriously get a declaration again saying that I have collected the money from him. Generally, it is a clean transaction, so there is no need to get a declaration. Even for unutilized ITC in case of exports, so for exports I am leaving, even inverted duty structure, in the application itself I will give clear details saying that this is what my input tax is, this is what my output tax is. So there is no declaration required. Anyway, I collect the output tax. Even if I collect the output tax from the other person, the output tax rate is less. That is why I'm making a refund claim. So for inverted duty also, there's no need to get a declaration. Tax paid on supply not provided for which invoice has been issued. See, in cases where invoice has been issued but service is not provided, so invoice has to be issued within a few days from the date of provision of service or date of receipt of payment, whichever is earlier. So if I receive the payment, I raise an invoice, but service has not been provided, I claim a refund because I will give back the money to him for non-provided service. So in this case also, I don't need to give a declaration. The tax paid in pursuance of section 77. In case of interstate supply being treated as intrastate supply, I pay IGST instead of CGST as GST or vice versa. In that case also, I don't need to give a declaration. In case of tax paid in pursuance of section 77. A refund claim can be made to the government of Bhutan. Remember that if let us say I am making a supply to Bhutan, to the government of Bhutan, and the tax has been paid by the government of Bhutan, so the refund can be credited directly to the government of Bhutan and it need not be claimed by some other person. It can be claimed by the government of Bhutan and the amount can be credited by the government to the government of Bhutan. So now a very important thing, what is the maximum refund in case of unutilized ITC? I told you that in case of unutilized ITC, there is a limit that has been put. So what is the maximum refund that I can claim? So net ITC into turnover of zero rated supplies of goods plus turnover of zero rated supply of services by adjusted turnover. So unutilized ITC, let us say 1 lakh is the input credit, the net ITC available as of today. So I am a supplier making zero rated supplies, or let us for convenience assume that zero rated supplies are exports. So I am a supplier making zero rated supplies, non-zero rated supplies, normal domestic supplies. So all kinds of exempt supplies. So all kinds of supplies are being made by me. Now what is the refund, maximum refund in case of input credit that I can unutilized ITC that I can claim? So the refund will be available to me only in respect of zero rated supplies without payment of tax, right? Only in respect of zero rated supplies without payment of tax, I can claim a refund of the unutilized ITC. So I will link the ITC of 1 lakh. So this 1 lakh, how much belongs to the zero rated supplies without payment of tax? So that is what I need to find out with using any formula. So this is the formula they prescribe. So net ITC into, so what is net ITC? Net ITC into, net ITC is the ITC availed on input services during the relevant period other than ITC availed for which refund is claimed under 4A. What is 4A, 4B? We'll look at it first, because without understanding what 4A, 4B is, we won't be able to understand this. So what is refund under 89 subsection 4A? What is refund under 89 subsection 4B? So this is a separate refund application that will be made. So what is 4A? Supplies received in respect of which supplier has availed benefit of deemed exports. Supplier has availed the benefit of deemed export. The refund of unutilized ITC in respect of other inputs and input services used in making such zero rated supply of goods or services or both shall be granted. So let us read this again. The supply received in respect of which the supplier has availed the benefit of deemed exports, the refund of unutilized ITC in respect of other inputs and input services used in making zero rated supply shall be granted. So in this case, I am receiving deemed exports. So if I am receiving deemed exports, let us say I am an advance authorization holder or EPCG holder, I am receiving supplies which are considered as deemed exports. So what I will be doing, the next step will be I will be exporting. That is why I am getting an EPCG license. So in this case, understand this, I am receiving supplies from a person and these are deemed exports, right? We've discussed that in case of deemed exports, either the person who is supplying the goods or me can claim a refund. In this case, that guy has claimed a refund of the supplies of the tax on supplies made to me. All right. So I give a declaration that I am not claiming ITC. I give a declaration that I am not claiming a refund. So this is the situation. All right. So forget the supplies from that guy. The other supplies will be there, no, for me. Other than these deemed exports, the other supplies that I receive from any other person, so on those I can claim a refund because I'm exporting zero rated supplies this is. So on the other type of inputs and input services I can claim a refund. So it will be claimed under 89 subsection 4A. The refund of unutilized ITC in respect of other inputs and input services used in making such zero rated supply shall be granted. So that is 89 4A. All right. What is 89 4B? In respect of inward supplies received from a person who is supplied at 0.1%, a refund in respect of other inputs and input services used in making zero rated supplies can be claimed. So what is a merchant export? So let us say X, Y and Z is in another country. 3 people are there. X supplies goods to Y, Y exports the goods. X manufactures the goods and supplies it to Y. Y just as it is sells it to Z in another country. That means he exports to another country. So in this case, Y is a merchant exporter. Alright, X manufacturer supplies goods to Y. Now because the Y is exporting, now X tells the government that I also should get the benefit of export because the next step is anyway exported, so I am also indirectly an exporter, says X. So the government says, okay, whenever you make a supply to Y, instead of the normal rate of tax, you put 0.1% tax. Alright, 0.1% tax you put, the government says. So this is the benefit given to a merchant exporter. The merchant exporter instead of paying 18% will pay only 0.1% tax. That 0.1% tax also he can claim a refund as unutilized ITC. This 0.1% also can be taken credit off and I can even claim a refund of this. So the merchant exporter, that is me, who purchases it from a manufacturer and just exports it off, has a refund option of inputs from any other person. So I receive inputs from any other person. I take the services of some transporters. That credit I can use. So that unutilized ITC in respect of other inputs and input services I can claim a refund of. That can be claimed under 89 4B along with the 0.1% tax that I pay. So this is 89 4A and 4B refund. Alright. Now we'll look at what net ITC is. Net ITC, ITC availed on inputs and input services during the relevant period other than ITC availed for which refund is claimed. So forget these other inputs for which I claim refund under 4A 4B. The rest of the ITC is called net ITC. Alright, the rest of the ITC is only what we are talking about. We know what net ITC is. Now, let us say 1 lakh is the net ITC. Now, turnover of zero rated supply of goods. Turnover of zero rated supply of goods. What does this mean? So, I will be given a refund of only in respect of exports without payment of tax. Alright. So, turnover of zero rated supply of goods and services would obviously be exports without payment of tax. Let us see what they are. Turnover of zero rated supply of zero rated supply of service, value of zero rated supply of services without payment of tax, obviously, plus aggregate of payments received for which include services provided during the current period, for which advance received in the previous period, minus advances received during the period for which services have not been provided. So the zero rated supplies of services obviously is exports without payment of tax. Alright, but advances are also included in this. Advances received in the previous period, let us say for the month of May we are claiming refund. Advances received in the period of April for which service has been provided in May. So this month actually the service is being provided. So the last month's advance that has been received, that I have to add it in this month's turnover because it belongs to this month. So whatever actually in substance belongs to this month should be added. So next month's service I receive advance in this month. So that is not included in my zero rated supply of this month for refund calculation. Alright, only what belongs to this month. Have I received the money? Yes. Then include it off. Even service provided or bill raised for which I do not receive payment at all, that also is included. Whatever belongs to this period is included here. Alright, value of zero rated supplies without payment of tax, aggregate of payment received for which service provided during the current period but advance received in previous period, that is added. Advances received during the current month which belongs to the next month is excluded. So zero rated supply of goods would obviously means zero rated supply of goods without payment of tax other than 4A 4B. Remember, other than 4A 4B. Alright, so the zero rated supplies in respect of inputs received, be it the merchant manufacturer purchase I make, me being a merchant exporter, so those exports remove them off. So the rest of the zero rated supplies, those are only included here. Now the numerator is over. What is denominator? So adjusted turnover has to be the total turnover. It includes this and something else. What is adjusted turnover? So adjusted turnover is turnover in the state. So registration wise refund application is made. So turnover in the state is the turnover pertaining to that state. Includes exports, includes domestic supplies, every kind of turnover is included. Turnover of zero rated supply of services, non-zero rated supply of services, or turnover of zero rated supply of services, non-zero rated supply of services, less exempt supplies, and supplies in 89 4A 4B are excluded anyway. Exempt supplies are also not. So what is adjusted turnover? Turnover in the state excluding turnover of services. So turnover of total goods, be it local supplies, exports, turnover of the state includes exports, exempted supplies, all the turnovers which is made from one registration in the state. So the refund application is also made state wise or registration wise. Now this turnover in the state includes, so all the goods type of supplies are covered, be it exports, non-exports, exempt ones. Now turnover of zero, now services are not included. I have to include services. So turnover of zero rated supply of services, alright, non-zero rated supply of services. So all services are included. So all type of goods are included, all type of services are included, zero and non-zero. So because this net ITC includes all type of supplies, so I am bifurcating it and allowing ITC only in respect of the numerator one. Less exempt supplies. So exempt supplies I am removing off. What are exempt supplies? Let us say some agricultural products are sold domestically. So exempt supplies are not even included in the adjusted turnover, and supplies under section 89 4A or 4B. So supplies under 89 4A 4B, as we've already discussed, those are also excluded. Now based on this, I will arrive at the maximum refund that is allowable. Alright. So without this formula, one cannot make an application for refund in case of refund of unutilized ITC. Inverted duty structure, pretty much the same. So my tax on inputs is more than the tax on outputs. That is the situation, right? So maximum refund is net ITC into turnover of inverted rated supply of goods divided by adjusted total turnover. Adjusted total turnover is the same. No refund of unutilized ITC shall be allowed if goods are exported out of India are subject to export duty. Remember that if the exports are subject to export duty, some leather products are subject to export duty. If that time exporting, I cannot claim a refund under inverted duty structure. Or I cannot claim a refund in case of making a zero rated supplies. No refund shall be allowed if supplier has availed drawback of CGST or IGST paid on such supplies. I can either avail a drawback of the tax paid on inputs or tax paid on imports, or I can avail a refund. I cannot claim a double benefit. However, one can claim a refund even if he obtains a drawback of customs duty. So customs duty is okay. When I import something, customs duty is levied along with IGST. So I can, if I claimed a drawback of customs duty, I can still claim a refund of IGST as per section 54. But I cannot, if I claimed a drawback of customs as well as IGST, I cannot again apply for refund of IGST as per this section because it will lead to double benefit. But minimum refund is 1000 rupees only. If it is less than 1000, you cannot make an application for refund. Now, what is the process for making a refund application? Refund application RFT 01 or 01A. An acknowledgement is issued within 15 days of making an application. If the refund application is found in order, if it is found in order, then refund to be sanctioned within 60 days of filing application. The refund order will contain amount refunded on provisional basis, amount adjusted, and the balance refundable. In case the acknowledgement is issued and it is found in order, a provisional refund of 90% of the total claim, in case it relates to zero rated supplies, will be sanctioned. Within 7 days, a provisional refund will be granted. Refund shall not be granted. Person claiming refund has not been prosecuted for any amount exceeding 2.5 crores in the past 5 years. The provisional refund of 90% will be granted within 7 days of getting an acknowledgement only if the person who is making a claim has not been prosecuted for an offense exceeding 2.5 crores in any of the past 5 years. If he has been prosecuted, he will not be allowed a provisional refund. If there is no cases pending against him which exceed 2.5 crores, then he will be sanctioned 90% of the provisional refund within 7 days. Only in case of, the provisional refund is only in case of zero rated supplies, remember, as per section 54 subsection 6. If it is not found in order, the refund application, then a deficiency memo is issued by the proper officer giving what are the deficiencies in the refund application made. Once a deficiency memo is issued, you have to make a fresh refund application. The refund application is said to be rejected. This is very unfortunate because if I find out that today is the last date for filing refund application and I file it hurriedly, then I have no option. He gives me a deficiency memo after 5 days. The original refund application would have been said to be cancelled. I cannot make a fresh refund application because the time is over. So this is very harsh. This provision is harsh, and the officers are wantedly giving deficiency memos. So this is as per section 90 subsection 3. If the initial application is not found in order, a deficiency memo is issued. Otherwise, an acknowledgement is given within 15 days of making an application. So if after verifying all the documents, everything is found in order, then a refund order is given within 60 days of what? The date of filing refund application. The date of filing the refund application is given in the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement says that, so this is the date of filing refund, this is the amount of refund claim. So the acknowledgement would have mentioned the date of filing refund. From that 60 days, he has to process the refund application, or an order has to be generated. All right. Now, in this case, if he is not satisfied, in this case, after verification, if he is not satisfied with this, he will issue a show cause notice along with grounds for rejection of the refund as to why he should not reject this refund. He'll give grounds also within 15 days. Within 15 days of giving an acknowledgement, he will give a show cause notice, and to the show cause notice, he has to reply within 15 days. If he is not satisfied with the reply, then he'll reject the refund application, giving clear written reasons as why he is rejecting the refund. If he is satisfied with the reply, he will grant a refund application. This has to be done within 16 days of filing the application. So the order will clearly say what is the refund granted on provisional basis. So let us say 90% is given. So this order will mention amount of 90% release, balance amount refundable, and the amount that is being adjusted. So if any previous pending tax is due, he will adjust the refund due to him with the amount already pending. So this is what the refund process is. Now, withholding taxes. What are the situations where the proper officer or commissioner can withhold the taxes or which is refund which is due to the applicant? 54 subsection 10 says that any refund of unutilized ITC due to zero rated supplies without payment of tax or due to inverted structure, the proper officer, in case of default in furnishing return, non-payment of tax interest penalty which has not been stayed by any court or appellate authority or tribunal by the last date of filing the appeal under the act, can withhold the refund. So he can withhold the refund till the returns are furnished. Alright, what does this mean? 54 subsection 10 says that the proper officer, so if a person has not filed the returns continuously, so the proper officer can say that because you have not filed the return, I am withholding your refund. Or some tax is due, a notice has been issued under 74 or 75 asking him to pay tax. An order also has been issued which is consolidated as a demand. Here he has not made an appeal to the next level authority within the due date for filing the appeal. Then it means that he is accepting it is deemed that he has accepted the demand order and tax is due from him. In that case, the proper officer can withhold the amount of refund to the extent of the tax payable by him. The rest of it he has to sanction to the extent that he needs to pay, that he can withhold. So that is this. If he has not furnished returns also, the proper officer is being given under the power under 54 subsection 10 to withhold the refund till the returns are furnished. If he files the returns immediately, then he just cannot withhold the refund. He can deduct the amount due from the refunds. The commissioner, if he has reasons to believe that the refund is subject matter of appeal or proceedings, or any other proceedings are pending under this act, and the grant of refund is likely to adverse or affect the revenue, he may withhold the refund after giving an opportunity of being heard. So what does this mean? So this power is being given only to the commissioner if he has reasons to believe that giving the refund would affect, let us say, this is a unique type of situation for 1 year. So the next year also, the same type of situation, let us say the previous year, the same type of situation is in litigation. It is before the appellate tribunal, GST appellate tribunal. And if I sanction the refund the next year. So the taxpayer would take note of this and say that next year the commissioner, the proper officer has granted the refund without raising any issue. Why are you disputing it in this year? That is what the taxpayer will argue with the appellate tribunal. So if the commissioner, remember the commissioner feels that it is prejudicial to the interests of the revenue, he will withhold the refund. He has power to withhold the refund and he will withhold the refund. Commission reasons to believe that refund is subject matter of appeal or further proceedings or any other proceedings are pending and the grant of refund is likely to adversely affect the revenue, he may withhold the refund. So he will give the taxpayer or the applicant an opportunity of being heard. Everywhere an opportunity of being heard is mandatory. Now, in case of export of goods with payment of tax, the shipping bill filed shall be deemed to be. Now, in case of export with payment of tax, what is the procedure? I will file a shipping bill, that is the refund application. No refund shall be granted unless the person in charge of the conveyance files an export report. So that is proof that the ship has actually moved out of the country. If the ship moves out of the country, the goods move out of the country. As I told you before, the person in charge has to file an export report or export manifest covering the number and date of shipping bill or bills of export. The applicant files a valid 3B. The applicant files a valid 3B and the details mentioned in 3B, taxable value, total value, should match with the shipping bill and what the export manifest or export report that the person in charge files. So all of these should be in unison. So we have to be very careful. The GSTR 1, most of our clients initially they got a lot of issues because there were a lot of mismatches with the shipping bill number. 1 rupee mismatch, the refund would have been rejected. GSTR 1 filed by the applicant. So let us say even if I do not file GSTR 1, also the refund will be sanctioned provided I just fill the table 6A. I just fill the invoice and not file it. Even in that case, the refund on export with payment of tax is sanctioned. 6A filled shall be communicated with the, because it has to be communicated with the ICE gate, the details of invoice number, date, details of shipping bill, all of them have to match with the details in the ICE gate portal. So only if I fill up the details in GSTR 1, it will be communicated, right? So ICE gate system and the system shall confirm that the goods covered by the invoices have been exported out of India by matching with the shipping bill filed. On receipt of information of filing return, the ICE gate, the amount equal to the IGST paid shall be credited to the bank account. Alright, this is the process. What is it? First, file a shipping bill or bill of export. So that is treated as the refund application. Next, the person in charge of the conveyance has to file an export report or export manifest covering the details of the shipping bill and shipping bill number. Next, the applicant files GSTR 3B. He also fills up GSTR 1 and the details of the invoices are communicated to the ICE gate portal. The ICE gate confirms that, okay, whatever the invoices covered in GSTR 1 have already crossed India, they are exported out of India, taken out of India. Then on that confirmation, the amount is credited to the bank account of the exporter. So this is what the process is. Refund to UN bodies. We already discussed this. Notified bodies can claim refund under section 55 of tax paid on inward supplies within 6 months from the end of the quarter in which the supply was received in GSTR 11. So GSTR 11 has to be filed. The refund application can be made within 6 months from the end of the quarter in which supply was received. Any specialized agency of the UNO, any multilateral financial institution and organization notified by UN. So one of the specialized agency of the United Nations organization is the World Health Organization. Consulate embassy, the Iran consulate, if it purchases any goods on payment of tax, it can claim a refund. Any other person has been notified. So the persons notified are the Canteen Service Department under the Ministry of Defense has been notified who shall be entitled to claim a refund of 50% of, so 50% of whatever tax paid by the Canteen Service Department on the inputs that it purchases, it can claim a refund. received by it for subsequent. So whatever I purchase should be used for subsequent supply to unit run canteens of the canteen service department or authorized customers of canteen service department. Refund is subject to conditions. What are the conditions to be satisfied? Inward supplies were received from a registered person against a tax invoice. Okay. Name and GST of or UIN of the applicant is mentioned in the tax invoice. In case of inconsistency with an international treaty to which the president is a party, such treaty shall prevail over the rules of the act. So for a UN body to claim a refund, these three conditions have to be satisfied. What are those? One, in the invoice issued to the UN body, it has to clearly mention the UIN of the recipient, that is UN body, and the supplier. Alright, that should be mentioned in the tax invoice. The inward supplies have to be received from a registered person with a valid tax invoice. So in case, let us say Narendra Modi signs a pact with the United States saying that no country will give refund of taxes paid by the consulates in the respective country. So the treaty is saying that no refund can be claimed, but the act says refund can be claimed. The treaty will prevail over the act and rules. That is what this says. Interest on refund. Now, what is the interest to be given on refunds? So if there is delayed refund, 6% interest, very less. If there is delay in payment of tax, 12% and 18% tax interest is given. So when the government has to give interest on refund, it will be very less, 6%. In case of delay of more than 60 days, so only after 60 days, the interest will be counted, that too. But in case I have to pay tax, it will be counted from the very next day from the due date. This is very unfair, but that is how it is. So in case of delay of refund, from the 61st day from which the refund is due or refund is sanctioned, interest at the rate 6% is paid. But interest at the rate 9% is payable in case delay refund, where refund is in pursuant of an order passed by appellate tribunal authority or adjudicating authority. Or if it is in pursuant to an order passed by appellate tribunal or appellate authority or adjudicating authorities, nothing but any proper officer passes an order sanctioning refund. In that cases, the 9% interest is applicable. In any other case, 6% from the 61st day, not the day on which the refund is due. From the 61st day, after the day on which refund is sanctioned, that is the day from which interest will be calculated. Alright, accounts and records. So what are the sections governing this? Section 35 gives us what are the accounts that need to be maintained, what are the records that need to be maintained, along with the rule 56 sub rule 7 and 56 sub rule 10. So every registered person, so we are talking of only registered persons, a person who is not registered or not required to be registered doesn't need to maintain these accounts and records, shall keep and maintain books of accounts at his principal place of business and books of accounts relating to additional place of business at that place. So if I have multiple places of business, in my registration certificate I would have principal place of business, additional place of business. So at the principal place of business, I'll maintain accounts and records relating to the principal business. At additional place, I'll maintain books and records relating to that place of business. So we shall maintain a true and correct account of production or manufacture of goods, stock of goods. So what are the stock of goods? Output tax payable and paid, ITC availed, inward and outward supply of goods or services or both, import or export of goods or services or both, separate account of advances received, advances paid and adjustments made, supplies attracting payment of tax under reverse charge along with relevant documents including invoices, bills of supply, delivery challan, credit or debit notes including receipt vouchers, payment vouchers and refund vouchers. Names and addresses of the persons to whom he has supplied the goods, names and address of the suppliers from whom he has received the goods, particulars of complete address of the premises where goods are stored by him including goods in transit along with particulars of stock stored therein. If the goods are found to be stored at a place other than the place without the cover of an invoice, The proper officer shall determine the amount of tax payable as if such goods have been. So these are the records that need to be maintained. So basically, what does he need to maintain? One, true and correct account of these things. Production. So let us start from scratch. So what is the basic thing that an officer wants when he comes for inspection? So he wants what are the goods that have been produced. I want what are the goods that are produced or manufactured. Next, I want what are the goods that inputs that have been procured, right? What are the details of inputs that have been procured? What are the details of output supplies? Three things. Goods manufactured or produced. What are the inputs that have been purchased? What are the outward supplies that have been made? In terms of tax, what do I want? I want details of output tax payable. I want details of ITC availed. So I want details of what is the actual tax paid. So three things in terms of tax: output tax payable, what is the ITC availed, what is the tax paid. All right. Now what else? What else? What are the names and addresses of the persons, names, addresses, and GST number of the persons from whom I've received the goods? Okay, one is covered. Outward, what are the names and addresses of and GST of the persons to whom the goods are supplied? So 7. Now what are pending? Let us see. Production or manual stock of goods, quantitative details of stock of goods, output tax payable and paid, ITC availed, inward outward supply of goods, import or export of goods, obviously, separate account. Now, if you look at GSTR 1, you will find out that there is a separate table in itself for you to enter details of advances received, what are the advances paid by me, any adjustments made. Let us say next month I make a supply in respect of the advance received in the previous month. So what is the adjustment made in this month for the advances? All of those details have to be separately maintained. So what are the supplies attracting reverse charge along with documents? So along with this, the relevant documents are also necessary: invoices, bills of supply, receipt voucher, payment voucher, receipt voucher, in delivery challenge, debit credit notes. So names and addresses, complete address where if the goods are stored in a warehouse or any other place in transit, what is the place where the goods are stored along with the details of the stock in that warehouse at that point of time. So let us say I find the proper officer finds the goods at any place which are not in the records. So I will treat that as a supply. I will find out what is the tax payable on these goods. I find some cocaine bags somewhere. So I find out what the tax that is payable as if a supply has taken place, and I will ask him to pay the amount. If these cocaine bags are not accounted for by this person, found to be at a place other than a place declared without the cover of an invoice, so I don't have valid document supporting it, then he will determine tax as if such goods have been supplied by such a registered person. Every registered person shall maintain an account of stocks giving details of. Other than a composition dealer, every person who is having a stock shall maintain accounts of goods received, goods supplied, goods lost, destroyed, disposed of by a gift or free samples, tax payable, tax collected and paid, ITC claimed, along with the register of. It is the same thing, but only looking at it from a stock point of view. What are the goods received, goods supplied? Third one, what is the ITC availed, tax, ITC received, what is the tax paid? One important thing is what are the goods lost, destroyed, disposed of by way of gift, free samples. This is the only thing probably you need to remember. The rest of the things are same. So all of the other things are already mentioned in the previous 11 or 12 points. So the only additional thing, if you would ask me, is tax payable. Only additional thing is goods lost, destroyed, disposed, because the proper officer wants this so that he can identify what is the credit that needs to be reversed. Remember section 17, you need to reverse tax on goods lost, destroyed, disposed of by a gift or free samples. Records to be maintained by an agent. In case of a principal agent relationship, what are the records to be maintained by an agent? First thing, what is the agreement written agreement between me and the principal. What are the terms and conditions? That is the first thing. Authorization received from principal to receive. So an agent is a person who receives or supplies goods on behalf of the principal but does not do it on his own account. So what is the authorization received from the principal that he needs to maintain? Now, obviously, quantity description of the goods received on behalf of the principal, quantity description of the goods supplied on behalf of the principal. Okay. Details of accounts. So I must be sending some quarterly or monthly or weekly statements to the principal regarding what is the stock received, what is the stock sold, what is the stock returned back. So those statements are also required to be maintained. Tax paid on receipt of supply or supply of goods effected on behalf of the principal. So finally, what is the authorization or agreement between me and the principal? What are the description and quantity of goods received by me on behalf of the principal? What are the quantity and description of goods supplied by me on behalf of the principal? Finally, what are the tax paid by me in case of supplies made on behalf of the principal? What are the accounts furnished by me periodically to the principal? Alright, these are the things. What are the records, specific records that the manufacturer needs to maintain? 5611 says this. 5612 gives us records required by manufacturer. What do you think? You will ask for production details. What are the inputs used in manufacture of this particular product? What are the input services used in manufacture of this particular product? That is the only additional thing. Monthly production records giving quantitative details of inputs, raw materials used in manufacture and services used in manufacture, and quantitative details of goods manufactured. So whatever used in making this input services or quantitative details of goods or raw materials. Now what is being made, the output or the byproduct or even waste and scrap details that come out of this process, those details are also required. Alright, quantitative details of goods manufactured including waste and byproducts. A service provider, now the crucial element that the proper officer wants to check is what is the input credit availed by the service provider. Generally service providers, let us take chartered accountants for example, have very minimal credit, maybe telephone bills, rent. So those are the major items. So he wants to have a close watch on what are the inputs that he has taken credit on. Has to maintain a statement containing quantitative details of goods used in provision of service, input services used and services supplied. All right. So a works contractor needs to maintain specific details like what. So on whose behalf, let us say I'm a construction contractor providing irrigation works to the government of Telangana. Alright, for whom am I providing this works contract? Names, address, and GSTN of the person for whom I am providing this contract. 1. I have to maintain the details site-wise. What are the input services received by me for providing this works contract? Names, address, okay, description, value, quantity of goods or services received in execution of works contract, quantity, value of goods or services utilized. So what are the description, quantity of goods received, of these goods that are received, whatever utilized in execution of the works contract, of suppliers from whom, so names and addresses of the suppliers from whom I've received the goods or services, details of payments received in respect of, so for each site's work, what is the payment received from each contract? So that details need to be maintained. A warehouse operator, in addition, needs to maintain details of, so you put yourself in the warehouse operator's shoes. You would have received goods from X. You would have sent goods to Y. You have to maintain details of the name, address, location, GSTN of the person from whom you received the goods, the person to whom you have shipped the goods, the description, quantity of the goods that are still in stock, what is the quantity of goods that are received, what is the quantity of goods that have been sent away, what is in stock, goods received, dispatch, movement and disposal of goods, goods shall be stored in such a manner that I can identify good wise. Let us say some soaps are being received and sold. So item wise, I should be able to identify at this point of time 50 units of soap are there. So in that way, I have to maintain records. Also, owner wise, so ITC and HUL, for both of them I provide warehousing service. So for ITC, how much stock is there? So I should be able to tell. In that manner, you maintain records. Owner wise and shall facilitate physical verification by the proper officer on demand. So all of these rules have been made keeping in mind the proper officer or the authorities. So who needs to verify records? Only the authorities. So on their point of view, from their point of view, we maintain the accounts so that it is easier for them to verify. Transporter. So what are the goods transported? What are the goods received by me? What is the goods delivered, goods in transit, GSTN of the consignor and consignee. Simple, huh? A transporter or a person owning or maintaining a warehouse, even though he is not registered, needs to obtain a unique enrollment ID from the e-waybill portal. So these transporters are very unorganized, even the warehouse owners. So because their turnover might not have crossed 20 lakhs, they will not register with GST. In order to have a track of these transporters, the GST legislation asks these transporters and warehouse operators to mandatorily register themselves not under GST but obtain a unique enrollment number by filing this ENR01 form in the e-waybill portal. They can obtain registration by making an application through e-waybill portal. They'll get a unique enrollment ID. So this unique ID is sufficient for them to make all the transactions. Even for entering part B, this unique enrollment ID is sufficient. Enrollment in one state should be considered as enrollment in any other state, and the same number can be used by transporter or. So I need not obtain multiple state registrations like GST registration. One unique enrollment number is sufficient for every state for the transporter or warehouse operator. A transporter who is having multiple GSTs can also obtain a unique enrollment number that should be quoted in the transporter details in part B and shall not be eligible to use GST in the e-waybill. So this option is also given to a transport. Let us say a big transporter is there. Arunachala Logistics, let us say. So this guy has transport operations all over the country, probably in every state. Or DHL Logistics, that is also a big company. So these transporters, so for every state they need to quote a separate GST number. In order to avoid this, because part B gives the details of the transporter, the state of the transport, the vehicle number, the GST number. Instead of quoting GST number in every state, sometimes mismatches happen. In order to avoid that, even transporters having multiple registrations in different states are given an option to apply for unique enrollment number, and instead of quoting GST number of every state, they can quote the unique enrollment number in order to avoid confusion. So can I maintain records in electronic form? Of course you can. Of course you can. But there are certain conditions that need to be satisfied. Accounts maintained in electronic form shall also be treated as books of accounts for GST purpose. So, but if you maintain accounts in electronic form, it should be authenticated by way of digital signature compulsorily. If you say that you are maintaining accounts in electronic form, it has to be digitally signed. Electronic, you have to compulsorily take a backup, and the backup should be taken in such a manner that you can retrieve the data at any time at any reasonable period of time within a reasonable. So if you take a backup in such a manner that you can restore it or restore the backup within 5 months, that is not possible. Within a reasonable period of time, you should be able to retrieve the data. So the registered person shall on demand produce relevant records and documents duly authenticated in hard copy. Where accounts are stored electronically, so if proper officer comes for inspection, he will be provided the passwords of all the files he will be given backups, he will be given access to all the records electronically and any other information necessary for access. Records cannot be erased. Okay, so no records for that matter can be erased or overwritten. If you take physical documents, for example, you can strike it off under authorization. If you, let us say, instead of 2 you wrote 20, so you have to strike off that 20 and write 2 again under signature of some authorized person. Let us say CFO has power to correct the accounts, that person's signature has to be there. It cannot be erased, overwritten. However, in case of electronic form, if I do have to change, then a log of when the change has occurred, at what time, by whom has the change been entered, all of those details have, the log of those details have to be maintained. Of every entry edited, deleted shall be maintained. Any incorrect entries can be scored off under attestation and thereafter correct entry shall be recorded. In case of pending appeal or investigation, so for how much time will I maintain the records? It shall be maintained for 1 year of, for a period of 72 months from the due date of filing annual return for the period pertaining to such accounts and records. So for financial year 17-18, I think February was the due date for filing annual return. It has been further extended. So from that day, from due date of filing annual return till 72 months, that means 6 years is the time given for maintaining records. So how long do I need to maintain? This is the answer. So what is an annual return? Who needs to get their accounts audited? So every person whose turnover in a year crosses 2 crore rupees needs to get their accounts audited by a CA or cost accountant. So if it is audited as per any other law, income tax law also requires auditing. Companies Act mandatorily requires auditing. So that is sufficient, but a reconciliation statement by chartered accountant needs to be attached along with the annual return filed, along with the audited financials. So if you did do a GST audit, you would understand that if you, while filing GSTR 9C, you would attach signed balance sheets, be it under any law, along with a reconciliation statement, which is audited, which is signed by, digitally signed by a chartered accountant or a cost accountant. So order, okay. In case of goods or services accounted for in the books of accounts, the proper, okay, as we've discussed, if the goods or services have not been accounted for and the proper officer finds that out, he will determine tax payable on that as if some supply has been made, and he can take action as per section 73 or 74. The registered person shall keep and maintain books for a period of 72 months from the due date of filing annual return for the year pertaining to such accounts and records. In case of pending appeal or investigation, so if an appeal or investigation is pending till the end of 1 year after the disposal of such appeal or revision or proceedings or investigation, the accounts and records shall be maintained. Now let us look at e-way bill, our final topic. So what is an e-way bill? Section 68, every person in charge of a conveyance carrying goods exceeding a prescribed value to carry the prescribed documents and the documents specified under rule 138 is the e-way bill. So it is a document evidencing movement of goods, to be precise. So this is the evidence that needs to be mandatorily carried, otherwise there will be consequence. What are those? We'll discuss now. But an e-way bill is mandated as per section 68. So every person who is in charge of a conveyance needs to carry a set of documents. One of those documents which is prescribed is the e-way bill. E-way bill is an electronic document evidencing movement of goods containing details of, it contains point of origin, the destination of goods, the details of consignor, consignee, and the transporter. It is two parts basically, part A and part B. Part A consists of the details of consignor, consignee, the point of origin, point of destination, what are the description, quantity, value of the goods that are being carried. Part B contains the transporter details. What is the vehicle number? Who is the transporter? The GSTN if any. unique enrollment number. E-way bill is generated in EWB01 format by the registered person or a person with a UIN, unique enrollment number, sorry. Benefits, faster movement of goods. So if with an e-way bill, there will not be constant, interception of vehicles. If it is once intercepted, it cannot be intercepted again. That is one of the rule. So there will be faster movement of goods, less turnaround time. Turnaround time is nothing but, so let us say it takes 24 hours to go there and come back for a vehicle. It takes lesser time now, right? Physical interface replaced by a digital one. So these e-way bills, I don't need to physically carry those. Just the e-way bill number, if I'm able to display it in an RFID device, radio frequency identification device, so which maps with the e-way bill, which maps the e-way bill number, then the proper officer shall just scan this RFID device and he'll be able to find out he'll be able to display the e-way bill on his device. Who needs to generate? But does everyone, where the consignment value of goods being carried exceeds 50,000 rupees, so that person needs to compulsorily generate an e-way bill. Consignment value. So a registered person causing movement of goods shall generate an e-way bill. So the question was, who needs to do it? Okay, when does it needs to happen is the question I answered. So who needs to do it? So every person causing the movement. It depends on the contract, right? So X is transporting goods to Y with the help of a transporter. He's an independent person. So the responsibility to transport goods is of X as per the contract. So the person causing movement is X. Alright, the person responsible to generate e-way bill is X. If Y is the person who is responsible to take delivery, X's job is finished the moment he produced the goods and put it in his factory, then the responsibility is of Y. So Y is generating or causing the movement. Y hires the transporter and asks him to collect the goods. Y is the person causing movement. So the person causing movement, so let us say X is unregistered. X is unregistered, then automatically the person responsible to generate e-way bill is, or the person causing movement is the registered person, which is this Y guy. Even though it is not his responsibility to take delivery, the person who has to generate e-way bill is that guy because he is registered. The onus is on registered person. If both of them are not registered and the transporter is the person who is the bakara now, he has to mandatorily, as we have discussed earlier, he has to mandatorily take a unique enrollment number. So he has to generate part A, part B and part C. Alright. Now we know who needs to generate e-way bill. Where consignment value of goods exceeds 50,000. What is consignment value? It is the value as per section 15. The inclusions as per 15 are the same. But the important thing to note is it includes the tax amount also. The value as per 15 does not include CGST, SGST, right? All taxes other than the tax as per GST law is included as per section 15. But for determining the 50,000 value, I have to include the CGST, SGST and IGST compensations also. Alright, they are making it even harder not to generate an e-way bill. The cases are very less. And the value of exempt supplies, let us say a truck is carrying goods worth 1 lakh rupees, 80,000 of value is exempt goods, 20,000 is only taxable. Then the consignment value in total is 20,000 only, and he does not need, the person in charge or whoever is causing movement need not generate an e-way bill. In relation to supply, so the transportation or movement of goods could be for anything, for supply, inter-branch transfer accompanied by delivery challan, or any cause, just generate an e-way bill. If there is movement, I want an e-way bill. Mandatory generation even if consignment value exceeds 50,000. Interstate transfer of goods by a principal to, so even if mandatory value is less than 50,000, some people need to generate. In case of interstate supply of handicraft goods to a job worker, interstate transfer by principal to job worker, interstate transfer of handicraft goods by a person exempted for. Remember that a person making interstate supply of handicraft goods need not register himself. Normally, a person who is making interstate supply of goods needs to mandatorily register himself as per 24. But if he is making interstate supply of handicraft goods, the 20 lakh limit is applicable to him also, and there is no audit trail here. So, in order to keep an audit trail, at least they are mandating the generation of an e-way bill. So, a handicraft goods transport, if they are being transported interstate and the person is not registered, still he needs to generate an e-way bill. All right. Interstate transport of goods by principal to job worker. So, here also the generation of e-way bill is being mandated if even if the value is less than 50,000. In case of bill to ship to transaction, only one e-way bill needs to. We've discussed what a bill to ship to transaction is. A, B, and C are there. All right. A is delivering goods to C at the direction of B. B tells A that deliver goods to C. B tells B tells A deliver goods to C. So in this is a bill to B bills to A, ships to C. So in this case, there are two transactions happening. So but only one e-way bill needs to be generated. That is sufficient. Part A. What does Part A contain? Part A needs to be filled by the person causing movement, date of dispatch and delivery, consignor and consignee details, value of consignment, HSN code, quantity, document number and date, reason for transportation. So Part B needs to be filled by the transporter, we said. Transport details, transporter document number, LR, RR, bill of lading, vehicle number in case of transport by road. However, Part A can be filled by the transporter or e-commerce operator on an authorization from the consignor. So remember, to be generated by the person causing movement of goods, and Part B is to be generated by the transporter of goods. In case the goods are being transported by a registered person, being the consignor or consignee on his own conveyance or a hired one, such. So if I use my own vehicle, my own company's vehicle to transport the goods, the person responsible to fill Part B is me, because no other third person is involved here. So I am the transporter, so I am responsible to fill Part B. Where the goods are handed over to a transporter and an e-way bill is not generated by him, such person shall fill the transporter's details in Part B and the transporter shall generate the e-way bill. See, I just hand over the goods to the transporter and I do not generate the e-way bill, then the transporter will fill Part B and the transporter will generate. So it is either or situation. It is not that the transporter has to fill Part B. Even though he does not do it, then either the consignee or consignor can take up his role. But it has to be done. Who does it? It is just immaterial. I just can give guidelines, but someone has to do it, right? In case of transport of goods by rail, air, or vessel, either of the consignor or consignee shall generate e-way bill. Delivery of goods will be given only after generation. See, these, if you transport goods by rail, at the destination, the railways, the Indian Railways will give you delivery only if you submit a valid e-way bill after generating. Unless and until that is done, the goods are not given to you. So that is a mandatory thing. Part B need not be generated in case of transportation of goods is for a distance up to 50 kilometers within the state or union territory from the place of business to transporter or transporter to consignee. What does this mean? So if it is within the state, let us say in the state of Telangana, I need to transport the goods within a limit of 50 kilometers. So I can just transport it without an e-way bill. So if only if, and that too, the exemption is for Part B only. Part A is mandatory even in this case. If it is less than 50 kilometers also, people have a misconception that I don't need to touch anything at all, but that is not true. Part A is mandatory no matter what. Part B is exempted from being filled up. That too, if you are transporting goods from your place to the transporter place and transporter's place to the consignee, if it is lower than 50 kilometers. Where there is a change in conveyance, the person filling up part A can himself update part B before the change or assign an e-way bill to the other transporter for updating part B. Once assigned, it cannot be assigned again. So see, if let us say I'm transporting goods from here to Mumbai and in between there is a change of lorry. In this case, part B contains transport details, right? So that has to be updated. So if an officer stops the vehicle, he has to have the new vehicle's name and number in part B, right? So someone has to update part B. Who is that? The person who is actually filling up part A can actually change the part B. It is not that the transporter, so before the goods are shifted to another conveyance, this has to be done. Before the change or assign a e-way bill to the other transporter, part B once assigned cannot be assigned again. So either the person can do it or you can tell the transporter to change part B. So let us say I assign it to the transporter for changing part B. Okay, the conveyance is also changed. Now terrific. Now what if now another truck is used? Now one more change has taken place. In this case, the transporter is new. The old transporter has updated part B. The new transporter would not have a clue, right? So in case of the second assignment, the onus is shifted back to the person who is actually filling up part A. So that person itself is responsible in case of second assignment. The second assignment cannot actually be done to a transporter. Only one assignment to a transporter can be done. See, in case of multiple consignments being carried in a single conveyance, the transporter may generate a consolidated e-way bill containing details of e-way bills for each consignment. The consolidated e-way bill does not have any individual validity. So a truck is carrying consignments for 10 people, right? So the proper officer stops the vehicle. Now he has to keep on removing all the papers of e-way bills, showing each e-way bill for each consignment. In order to avoid this, an option of consolidated e-way bill is being given in EWB02. The transporter can generate EWB02. So once an EWB02 is generated, it will automatically contain a list of all the EWB01s, which is the e-way bill numbers of all the consignments will be present in EWB02. So the proper officer can briefly check it. There is no individual validity for the consolidated bill because it consists of different consignments of different people. Now, what is the time limit for generation of an e-way bill? The normal time limit is 24 hours of generation of e-way bill. The cancellation period is 24 hours of generation of e-way bill. So within 24 hours of generation of e-way bill, I can cancel it. When is it set to be generated? Only after part B is filled up and updated, the e-way bill is said to have been generated. What is the validity of e-way bill? If the distance is up to 100 kilometers other than over dimensional cargo, it is 1 day. For every 100 kilometers thereafter, 1 additional day. For over dimensional cargo, let us say, what is over dimensional cargo? Over dimensional cargo is a type of cargo which is very hazardous. Let us say you take the example of petrol, which requires a lot of security. Very huge tanks are carried on highways. They go very slowly in order to avoid any kind of explosion. So there is a limit of speed prescribed for those vehicles. So taking that into account, the validity, so a normal truck, if it travels 100 kilometers, this truck would travel only 20. So keeping that in mind, a lower kilometer range has been prescribed, but for the same day, right? For up to 20 kilometers, 1 day validity. For every 20 kilometers thereafter, one additional day. So when will that one day be counted from? Let us say today I generate an e-way bill. So when will that one day be starting from? It will start from midnight of today. Each day will be counted as the day expiring on the midnight of the day immediately following the date of generation of e-way bill. Period expiring on the midnight of the day immediately following the generation of e-way bill. So today I generate an e-way bill. One day would be complete tomorrow midnight. Or tomorrow I generate an e-way bill. The one day would end on at 12 o'clock the day after tomorrow. So that is how this one day will be calculated. E-way bill is to be accepted before delivery or within 72 hours of generation, whichever is earlier, failing which it would be deemed to be accepted. Right, it has to be accepted before delivery of the goods, obviously, or within 72 hours of generation, whichever is earlier. Otherwise, it is deemed to be accepted. If the receiver or the other person who is the counterparty to the generation of e-way bill does not accept the e-way bill, people cannot wait, right? It is deemed to have been accepted. Situations where e-way bill is not required. Transport of the following notified goods: LPG to household consumers, the gas that you get in your house, and non-domestic exempt category customers are also the small autos carrying those LPG gas need not generate an e-way bill. Kerosene oil sold under PDS, postal baggage, the Department of Posts, if its truck carries postal letters to the customers, it need not generate an e-way bill. Precious metals, surprisingly, the diamonds and gold, if they are transported from one showroom to another or from any place to any other place, precious metals, platinum, gold, diamonds, natural or cultured pearls, no e-way bill needs to be generated, because for the simple reason that a small, I think you can put a small diamond in your pocket and be traveling in a bike. So even in this case, it is very difficult to find out, right? One diamond will cost about 5 crore rupees, but it is difficult to find it out. Even if I don't generate an e-way bill, it does not matter. So these have other control mechanisms. So it is not required to, they are not required to generate an e-way bill. Jewelry, goldsmiths, silversmiths and other articles, currency, used personal household effects. If I'm transporting my, I'm shifting from one house to another and I engage a goods transport agency to transport my fridge and all, I don't need to generate an e-way bill. He does not need to generate. Transport by non-motorized conveyance. If let us say a rickshaw wala is carrying goods from one state to another, he does not need to generate an e-way bill. Only for motorized vehicles, this e-way bill is required. Goods being transported from customs port, airport and land customs station to the container freight station, or ICD for clearance by customs and vice versa. So let us imagine you have imported goods. So the goods first enter the port and from there they are being shifted to the inland container depot. So for that transport, no e-way bill is required. Similarly, vice versa. When you are exporting, when our goods are transported from a container freight station to the customs port or airport, no need to generate an e-way bill. Where goods being transported are exempt from tax. We already discussed that the consignment value does not include exempt value. In case of goods being transported are those things which are out of the purview of GST: high speed diesel, automatic aero turbine fuel, motor spirit, crude petroleum, natural gas, alcoholic liquor for human consumption. Where supply of goods being transported would be covered under Schedule 3. Even in that case, so what are those? So things which are not outside the purview of GST, where goods being transported are transit cargo from Nepal or Bhutan from or to, supply of goods by the canteen service department to unit run canteens, no e-way bill required. Movement of goods caused by the defense formation under the Ministry of Defense, where consignor of goods is the central government, state government, local authority for transport by rail, remember. So this is a case where you will get confused. In case the central government, state government, local authority is either is the consignor only, not consign, who is sending the goods is central government, state government, local authority. For transport of goods by rail, two things to remember are consignor and rail. Consignor has to be the central government, state government or local authority, and it has to be by rail. Empty cargo containers, empty trucks going, why do they need to generate an e-way bill? Maybe the container costs more than 50,000, that is not a, but my main purpose, what am I transporting? Nothing, thin air. Goods being transported to a bay bridge up to 20 kilometers and back. Alright, empty cylinders for packing LPG are being moved for reasons other than supply. Empty LPG cylinders are moving. What documents are required to be carried by a transporter? Let us say I am a transporter, I am transporting goods from Tamil Nadu to Maharashtra. So what are the documents? What is the checklist that I need to have? I need to have a tax invoice. If it is a supply, there will be a tax invoice. If it is not a supply, inter-branch transfer also is a supply now, a deemed supply. Even without consideration, it should be treated as supply as per schedule 1. That is one thing. Second thing is, I need to have a delivery challan if it is not a supply. If it is within the same state, between two places, I just want to get my goods repaired. So I need to have a delivery challan, right? Or a delivery challan or invoice. Along with that, I have to have an e-way bill. So these three things are very important. So copy of e-way bill, I need to have either a physical e-way bill or the e-way bill number linked to the radio frequency identification device in such a manner that, so I have an RFID device where the e-way bill number is mapped to this device. So the proper officer intercepts my vehicle, he scans this RFID device, and by scanning the RFID device, he will be able to look at the e-way bill of mine, the complete e-way bill part A, part B in his device. So he checks it. If he finds everything okay, he'll let my vehicle go. So that is the process. So if an electronic e-way bill number in electronic form, number mapped to an RFID embedded onto the conveyance. So I will either have to carry a tax invoice or bill of supply in case of exempt. Anyway, exempt is not, if I'm carrying exempt goods, I don't need to generate an e-way bill. Delivery challan, copy of e-way bill. So these are the two documents that I need to carry. One can generate an invoice reference number in the GST portal after uploading the details of the invoice, and IRN can be shown instead of carrying the physical invoice also. If I don't need to have this first point also, generate an invoice reference number. You go to the e-way bill portal or you go to the GST portal. In the services, there will be an option called generate an invoice reference number. So what you need to do is you have to give all the details of an invoice and you can generate an invoice reference number. Once you generate the invoice reference number, what happens? So that invoice reference number can be given to the proper officer. He can see it in his device, the details of the invoice. You don't even need to physically carry the invoice. So once this is generated, it is valid for 30 days. IRS shall be valid for 30 days. And from this IRN, part A of the e-way bill shall be auto-populated. You don't even need to fill part A. The commissioner may by notification require a person in charge to carry the following documents instead of e-way bill. Now verification of documents and conveyances. So who can stop my vehicle and when can he stop it? That is the question that 138B answers. The commissioner, see, the persons who are capable are commissioner or any person empowered by the commissioner. So the commissioner says, okay, you are capable of doing this. So he authorizes any other officer in return. So that guy. So these two people are there. So any of these two authorize any other proper officer, any other officer authorized by the commissioner or a person empowered by the commissioner. So three people are there. So either the commissioner or an officer empowered by the commissioner or any person, three, authorized by the commissioner or person empowered by the commissioner can intercept a vehicle, can intercept a conveyance. So what can he do? He can just check the e-way bill. Just check the e-way bill that is there electronically or RFID wise. Just check the e-way bill. First thing he has to do is check the e-way bill, nothing else. Cannot say stop it, keep it for 1 hour. He has to check the e-way bill. Now, when can he check the goods physically? When can he open the trunk and check the goods? Only when the physical verification shall be carried by a proper officer authorized by the commissioner or a person empowered by him. It can be done by any other person on specific information of tax evasion after authorization. So these people, okay, they've checked the e-way bill. They can also verify the vehicle. So they can check the e-way bill and also physically verify the conveyance and the goods inside the conveyance. So that power they have. Who has? These three people have the power. So can any other person check the vehicle? Yes, any other person apart from these three people can also do it, provided that there is information of tax evasion. That evidence he has to show that there is information that some tax is being evaded, and he also, that other person should also get an authorization from the proper officer, from the commissioner or person empowered by the commissioner to check the vehicle. Okay, 138B tells us what can he do. He can verify the e-way bill, physically verify the conveyance. Now, proper officer, alright, the moment I intercept a vehicle, the person who is doing it has to submit a summary report of what have I checked within 24 hours in part A. So part A of that report, summary report, has to be uploaded online within 24 hours. If he is not doing it, something illegal he is doing. He's just doing it for money. Some bribery is happening. So if it is an official interception, he has to upload part A within 24 hours. And after further verification and all, he has to submit part B, the final report, within 3 days. Submit midnight, starting from the midnight of the day of interception. All right. Okay. It can be extended by a further period of 3 years on approval by the commissioner or officer authorized by him, where physical verification has been done at a place. So if I do this physical verification at one place, it cannot be stopped at any other place in the state or in any other state. So only once in the whole country it can be checked, unless there is some subsequent information made available to me saying that some tax evasion has taken place. Unless I have subsequent information after the first checking, I cannot stop the vehicle. So that evidence that there is tax evasion after the first checking has to be proved by the person who is stopping it. Unless subsequent information is available, okay. The taxpayer in case of conveyance has been intercepted, detained for more than 30 minutes. So the maximum period that guy can stop my truck is 30 minutes. If it is more than 30 minutes, the truck owner or the consignor or consignee can upload the details of the truck being stopped in his portal, saying that it is in a way a form of complaint, saying that my vehicle is being stopped for more than 30 minutes. So with this information being uploaded, a query is raised on the person stopping it, saying why did you stop it for more than 30 minutes? Give reasons. So this most people do not know this. So you can just advise your client, saying that if it is stopped for more than 30 minutes, you have an option to submit the details in your portal. This is given by section 138D. In certain cases, the recipient keeps the goods at the transporter's godown and takes it in his place at a later date. The recipient has to declare the godown as his additional place of business. So these textile owners and all, they don't have the infrastructure of a warehouse. So they purchase the raw material for textiles from someone and keep that material in the transporter's godown for a particular period of time, because they don't have a specific warehouse. In that case, they have to declare the transporter's warehouse as their additional place of business. And what is the e-way bill generation process for this situation? E-way bill shall be valid till the time goods reach the transporter's warehouse. So the supplier must have supplied it to the transporter warehouse, right? The transport, so that e-way bill is valid till the transporter warehouse. From the transporter's warehouse to the recipient's place of business, one more e-way bill needs to be generated. The responsibility of books of accounts in respect is also on the recipient. So the books in respect of this stock is also on the recipient. So this is covering e-way bill, refunds, accounts and records. So in the next lessons we'll cover very important topics: appeals revision and also customs foreign trade policy, and close it off. Thank you very much.